Yeah, hello and welcome to another workshop live from the HOFA studios. My name is Steffen. I am a tutor here and engineer here at HOFA. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Dennis Ward. How are you doing, Dennis?
All right, man. Good to be back.
All right. Okay, we have a rather nice topic for you today, and that's mixing low end in modern metal. And yeah, hello and welcome. We have a slight delay. I'm sorry. Live from the HOFA studios. My name is Steffen. I am a tutor here and engineer
Just
here
a
at
moment,
HOFA.
please.
And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Dennis Ward. I'm
sorry.
How are you doing, Dennis?
All right, man. Good to be back.
All right. Okay, we have a rather nice topic for you today, and that's mixing low end.
So
okay, let's fix that. Okay. We're very sorry for the delay. We brought you a nice topic, and that's mixing low end in modern metal. Yeah.
that was
that
funny.
threw me off kind of bit.
All
So
good,
yeah,
all good.
I brought some tracks, just some basic stuff like drums, bass, guitar, and a synth track without the vocals, and yeah. But let's just start with a little question. What's your usual approach when it comes to targeting the low end in a metal track?
Okay. First of all is, of course, separation of kick and bass guitar. You want to get those both to have certain power. You want them to have power in certain areas of the low frequencies. Sometimes I want the kick to be deeper than the bass, sometimes the other way around. Often these days I find it interesting to make the kick drum punchy around 100 hertz and the bass to be a little below that. But that's the first thing I concentrate on. Then I also try to match the resonance of guitars to fit into this foundation that we've made with bass and drums.
All right.
And eventually I will go to looking what I can clean up in the low end. That means like if there's some rumble from some tracks that maybe are completely unnecessary, it could be overdubbed guitar parts, keyboard pads, cymbals, whatever, hi-hat. I'll try to keep that clean and then basically look at the volume levels where everything works well together. That's probably the most important part, getting a volume balance
All right.
of all the tracks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got a song here. As you said, you pointed out that you had recorded this. This is a programmed drum. Everything is in stems, stereo stems for everything, except, of course, the bass and the guitars. It's quite processed, meaning that these are pretty finished sounds. These are not extremely linear, but that's fine, And we're going to have a listen to the song starting from the top, as is, no plugins activated. And yeah, here we go. All right, that was it.
Okay, just some quick information for you out there. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. Due to this minor issue we had in the beginning, we'll only be able to answer them after the break. That being said, we're taking a break, a short break after 45 minutes, and then we'll continue with this workshop. So yeah, that's it. So
Okay.
where do you want to start?
Where do you want to start? Okay, like I said, I would probably start with the kick and the bass guitar. As you hear, first of all, I mean, this sounds great right out of the box. I mean, we've done literally nothing here. The only thing I have is in the master section, I have a gain reduction just to be sure we don't go over 0, just to, you know, keep the headroom going. And I have some things prepared, but everything is off or bypassed. And it really sounds great, you know. So we wanted to sound better, I guess. And in this case, I would start by, let's say, I'll solo the kick drum. This is what we've got. I'm going to solo the bass guitar too. They sound great together. But I might want to get a little bit more power out of them, okay? And in this case, I've got an EQ that I've prepared here. All we've done is... well, we used a high-pass filter that's set to an 18 dB octave curve. And by using the band Q control, we can actually... oh, I'm on the wrong one. Excuse me. You can control the resonance of the low end. And I'm going to turn this on. And let me turn everything off for the moment, just so you can hear the difference. Start with the bass drum on its own. What's happening here? That's a dramatic difference. I am cutting the lows and making a bit more of resonance around 50 hertz. I'm also taking a little bit out at 100 hertz, very small bit, just to make it less stuffy sounding. We've also got a tiny boost of about 6K, just to make the kick a little bit more present. Again, with and without. So what's happened here, we've just made it sound a little bit bigger. That's basically it, right? And with the bass guitar. Okay. As you hear, there's just a little bit more power in the deepest of the low ends that we want to have, so that it just cuts through in this big mix, this very, very dense mix. Let's check this out in the mix with everything. Okay, you might even say, well, that's a bit much. Could be, possibly. I'm always trying to overdo it first and then back up later. So I feel we could do something with the bass guitar too that could make it stand out a little bit better. Now, there's all kinds of neat plugins here. One that I often use, it sometimes works quite well, is this double tap. It's just a very simple bass dynamic compressor. You can compress the low end, you can compress everything, you can control the level of the low end and overall. It's got this feature called grunt that sometimes works great. EDM, it says there for EDM music, but you know, you can use it for anything. Either a glue effect of the compressor or this grunt effect. I find the grunt, even though it sounds very cool on its own, I find it to be often just too much. So let's activate this thing, see what it sounds like. First of all, without. And in this setup, I've just compressed the bottom end a little bit and extended the volume just a bit so that the deepest frequencies are a little bit louder. It sounds to me like around 100 and below. I don't know for sure because you can't really set up anything else except those things. Here's this grunt effect. Sounds cool. But I know already in the grand scheme of things, it's just too much. It's way over the top. Even though it does sound cool, it makes the bass stand out really well. it starts to make the guitar sound tiny in comparison.
Yeah.
And this is a guitar song, and the guitar cannot suffer because of having a really cool bass sound. It's hard to say as a bass player, I must admit. But that's one thing I could do, and if we compare... The bass guitar is reacting very well with the kick drum and is less masked. Now, the next thing I would do...
Could you show this in the analyzer?
I most certainly can. I guess I have to put an analyzer in there, shouldn't I? Huh? Let's do that. I will put it here, and I'll lie HOFA analyzer. How's that? Look at that. Isn't that nice? Okay, let me get rid of this. Now, first of all, you see the resonance right away of the kick drum, right? That's obvious. So. Okay, I'm seeing the energy around here being added and subtracted, so it was around 100 hertz like I thought, which in this case is we're making the bass guitar a little bit more thick on the higher bass frequencies and the kick drum thick on the lower bass frequencies.
It's basically where you set the cut on the EQ on the kick, yeah.
Right. But you can do both ways, you know. You can do, sometimes it's kind of neat to make the kick drum, you know, a bit more thuddy in the higher bass frequencies, and the bass guitar thicker on the lowest frequencies. There's they're both good depending on what you want. Another thing we can do here is I can start by just bypassing all these things that we don't need. So we've got our bass here, a multi-band compressor. So I'm going to compress just the lowest frequencies. A very small ratio or a very low ratio, 2.2 is considerably low.
Yeah.
I'm using automatic release. I'm using relatively fast attack because it just doesn't matter for this. And all it's doing here is it's reducing quite a bit. And I've taken up the volume, 4 dBs of these low frequencies. I must also explain that, you know, the cutoff, the crossover is at 100 hertz here for this band. So 100 hertz and below is being compressed and raised in volume. If I did not raise the volume and just let it compress, you'd hear that it's like actually taking away these deepest frequencies. Now, if I just don't compress, let's say I don't compress at all, and take this up, it just gets a little bit messy and wobbly. And as soon as I start compressing it, it seems to get it in control, right? And sometimes you can actually take it up a lot, depending on what you're doing. But we're not going to overdo it. Now, together with the band, okay, as you can hear with the double tap, it's a very similar effect. Basically, compressing the low end, taking up the volume of that low end, just so it's always there, a bit more stable, and is always there in the mix of things. What I would also do in this case is actually to compress the high mids, just to get a little bit more resonance on the attack out. And if I solo this, it's basically what we're doing. We're compressing between 2 and 6K. Yep. Maybe a little higher. And also taking up the volume just a bit so we hear a little bit more of this constant, you know, shake, crunch, clack, whatever you want to call it, so that it's there like a bit like an EQ curve, you know. It's like the deepest lows or the lower lows and the attack of the high mids are always constant because they're being compressed together and not moving in dynamic. So, without. sounds fine. With sounds a bit bigger, right? So there's nothing happening there. Interesting. Let me just turn this stuff all off, get out of my way. What else does it happen? And in this case, especially in this song, the way that the bass is supporting the guitar, it's actually making the guitar sound more powerful because it's helping with the attack. You're playing basically the same thing. And this is a good thing. This is what we want. Let's continue here. Go back to the drums. I could hear, for example, on the toms. We've also grouped the toms here. And they could also use a little bit more low-end control to get the bass frequencies a little bit more stable. I'm going to try to make a little loop here somewhere. How's this? I think there's some drums here. Yes. Okay. And I'm going to use another multi-band compressor. This is the Master X HD from TC Electronics. Now, if anybody is as old as me, which I'm sure no one is, you might remember the TC, what was it called? The Power Core, right? It was a extra DSP.
Okay.
It's a PCI card or it was a Firewire card, if I remember correctly. And this just gave, like the UAD stuff, a little bit more DSP, and it had its own plugins, and it had this Master X 3 and the Master X 5, which was a 5-band version of this plugin. And this is just a multi-band compressor. I've always loved it on toms because it just did something special. I have to admit, I think the native version is cool, but it doesn't sound like the original version. And it works a little bit differently, but it still works quite well. Let's start with these toms again. Toms sound great. Now I've got a setup here. All it's doing is, this EQ is not an EQ in the sense of more lows, more highs. It's influencing where the compressor reacts,
Okay.
right? You've got a crossover here. See here between 2.8 and whatever. I'm crossing over between 220 and below. It's crossing over. And when I compress it, and again, a lower ratio, you see that's where threshold is being hit. You see it reacting on the deepest frequencies. And all it seems to be doing is it's actually making the sustain of the low end a little bit longer. So you get the feeling of this extra bottom. We've made the highs frequencies a little bit louder. Not louder in the sense that they're louder, but louder that they hit the compressor harder.
Okay.
Giving us a little bit more stick, right? So without, with, and the bottom you feel the sustain is a little bit longer. We haven't taken it up at all. It's reduced a little bit in the middle, but I don't think that counts because it's like 0.1. I don't think that's actually hearable. And this is what it sounds like in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, it's just a nice way to stabilize these low frequencies. Multi-band compressors are in general, my opinion, they seem to have more effect when you're actually trying to control single areas instead of everything all at once. Because everybody thinks, I need a multi-band compressor, then I'm going to do this in the mids and this in the highs and this in the lows. It's not really necessary. Sometimes you can use it specifically for a bandpass filter or a bandpass compressor, right? Saying that I wanted to concentrate on just the lows, just the mids, just the highs. Like a de-esser is basically the same thing as just concentrating on the highs, but you can use 3 or more, whatever your multi-band compressor does. And I find it for controlling low end to be most useful when you actually are concentrating only on the low
Could you
end.
show it in the stock multiband of Cubase?
Certainly. Let's try the good old stock multiband from Cubase. Do you see it? It's right there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
It's
It's on the wrong monitor.
on the second monitor.
Okay, this is a 5-band, the stock version. For a start, we're just going to bypass the other ones. I think that's all. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, it's only a 4-band, not a 5-band. And I'm going to leave, 150 is okay, I guess, as a crossover. Start there. So the attack, release, I might actually use my own now because it is a percussive instrument. Same thing here. We're not really making it louder. It's just the sustain is a little bit more. Now this is a different kind of multiband compressor. This is actually, this EQ section is actually the volume level after the fact, not before the fact. So this can be used as an EQ, saying I want to make my low end louder. So everything is raised when I do this. It's not doing what I like as much as the other one. The other one just from TC just reacts very, very differently. But it can be useful if you're just trying to tame your low frequencies.
Okay.
As you see, it's just pulling them down there. If I compare it, I mean, this is... It just sounds a bit better. It's just a little bit more, for this purpose, it works better, But this one works fine too for certain things, You could control stick noises. Let's say you have some toms and the sticks are a little bit too penetrant around 6K. You can compress to that small area, pull it down a bit. Basically like a glorified de-esser. It's the same concept, And there's other ones out. There's from, I don't know, what's that called? The 3000. It's a 4000 actually. Yes, the ML 4000. And it's on the wrong side too. This is also a very, very good multiband compressor with lots and lots of features. If I can turn them all off, that would be the best. It's got a gate, an expander, compressor, and a limiter. But let's say we just want to work on the compressor side. Also here your cutoffs are set up like this, 4 bands. I will actually turn everything off down here too so I don't make any mistakes. So all the blue ones are the compressors. And this, like I said, is a bit more complicated. You've got to make sure you're clicking on the right thing or it's not going to do anything. You hear this one work like right away. The gain is here. Yeah, and it works quite well too. I've used it for this situation too, but I'm actually more into the Master HD, Master X HD, just because it does something that I don't know. I like the way the EQ reacts before as a sidechain to the compressor, as opposed to just being an extra level after the fact. It just seems to do it really, really well. So, but that's also an option. There's many options for this kind of thing. All right, let's maybe move along here a little bit. And before I go to the drums, or actually complete the drums, I'd like to maybe turn this on. This is the SSL Vintage Drive. Is kind of a saturation effect. I find it to be very similar to a tape saturation. And I just like the way that it just balances out the drums. And just to show this, I'm just going to turn it on because in the grand scheme of things, for the bottom end, it makes a difference. Good saturation in your drums makes things sound bigger. It's doing very little. I've got the density up and drive up a bit, and the mix almost at 100%. Long story short, this is a really, really cool tape simulation. Very, very cool. And we can compare it with some other things. For example, let's try, well, what's popular? Kramer?
Chroma tape, yeah. For example.
This seems to be, yeah, quite popular. So this actually works best at lower tape speeds. You can hear the kick drum getting squashed to death.
Not just the low pass.
The low pass, yes. You know, this way it's not doing a whole lot of a difference. Normal bias. That's making a difference. Okay, it's shifting the complete bottom end of the kick drum. And I personally wouldn't be too keen about that because I kind of liked what we had, as where this one is preserving the whole bottom.
Yeah.
And since we're talking about low end, you know, you got to be careful when you start adding stuff to the sum of groups that really completely alter the whole bottom spectrum.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
You'll be trying to match things up again and again and again, and it just gets crazy. So I personally wouldn't opt for that. But there's still some other things like Sheps, if I can spell that right, S-C. How do we spell that? S-C-H, right? Sheps. The Omni channel has this nice little feature. Right, here we go. And it's called Thump.
Oh yeah.
It
Actually
thumps.
quite a lot, yeah. Could you try it?
In the music? Without? With? $40B? Also very effective, can do a lot. Of course, it's not the same as this, which is the tape saturation. But this thing has, actually, I can show this as well. It has a really good saturation effect that I like.
Could also try it on the kick solo.
On the kick drums too. Yes, we could definitely try that. Let's actually get rid of it here. Go back to the kick drum and turn off this. Get rid of this. Let's put the Sheps back on it. On the kick drum. So. So let's hear that. The 40B seems to be quite similar to what we've done here.
Yep.
Again without. Both. Okay, I prefer this one simply because it's more in control of what we want, and then you got this little boost here that seems to be helping as well. Sure, we could do it here probably too, if you want to get into it. I just want to show this thump feature because it is quite cool for that kind of stuff too. Also works great in guitars, by the way. I've tried it in guitars, and it made a nice effect if you had the feeling you weren't getting enough oomph from below. It
I guess we
seems to
could
do
try
that.
that later if we're talking about the guitars.
We could try that
we
later.
Have, rather low tuning, I guess.
Yes, it is very low. What is this?
This drop C. So
Drop C, that's quite
I don't know
low,
where
yeah.
the fundamental of that is frequency-wise, but actually, originally I intended to bring a song that is dropped to drop G sharp.
Oh my god. Okay.
That actually would be kind of interesting, but I think drop C is actually low enough. So
Yeah, I think so. Yes, it's
let's
low.
go. Let's see what we could do to the drums, to the bass, and we'll
Okay.
get to the guitars later.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm actually thinking maybe it's a bit much on the kick here. And maybe you could try a different octave. I don't know if this is... This is the thing. If you notice, I go to a higher octave, a higher dB on the octave. It cuts more on the deeper frequencies, but it resonates more on the 50 hertz thing, right? So if I go like very low, you can even see it here. It's resonating not at all. 12 dB, 18 dB. And more. And it seems to be that 12 dB is a little bit nicer. I might even go back just a tiny bit. The smallest movement makes such a difference. That seems to be doing it quite well. I think we'll stick to that. Now we've done our toms and stuff. I'm going to leave that for now as far as the drums go. We have on the master, we have this drive that I want to turn on. Just to have the whole thing, you know, a little bit denser. Just want a little bit more density. Now, let's go to the guitars because they're actually starting to fall back a little bit to our fatness that we got going on here, right? Now, there's a lot of things we can do here. A classic thing is the pull tech trick, which is basically, you know, you're adding and removing the same amount. This can be done on bass guitar, on kick drum, on guitars, whatever. So you're adding and removing around the same amount of a certain frequency. We'll start actually with just the bottom, right? And in this case, we're going to go to the setting 30 hertz. I don't know if that's really 30 hertz or not, but this is the effect of it. It's making a little bit chunkier. Let's try 60 hertz. It's making it chunkier too, but it's also making it a little bit woolly sounding, to be honest. So if I had to choose, I'd prefer the 30 hertz. You can even go extreme here. Now you hear the resonance happening. At the same time, it's taking a lot out of the low mids, so I would be careful with it. In the mix, okay, in the mix, it's definitely got a good resonance going on, but it also seems to be pulling it back a tiny bit. I have taken down the volume a little bit to compensate, but it's taken the guitar back just a tiny bit, or you know, in the mid frequencies. And sometimes I will try to maybe add something here to compensate. Of course, when I bypass it, it doesn't work. The lowest frequency we got is 3K, so it's not really pulling the mids forwards. But it helps a bit with aggressiveness. The same thing here, we can add and remove. Maybe not as much. Put that in the mix. It's interesting, but what I'm not liking is what's happening to the mids. It's taking the mids away and in a bad way.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm really not too keen on this concept for this mix. So let's try something else. We've got the Master X in it again. Again, a 3-band multi-band compressor. Now, I like the way this one handles the bottom end. That's all I can say. I just really like the way it takes care of the bottom because this EQ is pushing into the side chain as instead of just being an EQ after the fact. And let's check this thing out. First of all, before we compare, you can see what's happening. Right here, it's pulling down in the mids as well. See, here's the threshold, and that's how much it's compressing everywhere. It's a very small light, but you can kind of see what's going on, meaning that now it's doing nothing. Now it's doing a lot. What I'm liking about this, it seems to have the power. It just sounds more powerful. It's the best way I can describe it. So it's controlling the low end without pushing it away, right?
Yep.
As where this other effect here was like pushing it to the background.
Especially with the palm mutes.
Yes.
Get them way more under control.
We need that control so it doesn't get messy, but we don't want the guitar to get small. I mean, that's against the point of the whole thing. So let's listen to it in the mix. So I'm liking that way more. Before anybody tells me, I know I'm a bass player. This bass is too loud. I don't know what too loud means on bass. That's just a good thing. Now, the bass of the guitar actually seems to be bigger now. It's in control, but it seems to be, the whole thing seems to be bigger. And that's a good thing because compared to the bass guitar without, the guitar sounds very small.
Yeah, definitely.
Now it seems to match the bass more. And this is the rabbit hole that we can get caught in working on bass things. You make this bass here, you need to make that bass here. In comparison, that sounds smaller, and this, and then everything doesn't seem to match after a while because this is too big for that. And you can go back and forth and drive yourself crazy and ask yourself, why don't you just do this in the sum? Well, you can. There's nothing wrong with that. If that works for you, that could be maybe all you actually need to do. I do, however, find doing it this way, even though it's more tedious and more work, you just have more control.
Yeah.
You know, the specific things you can control compared to each other. For example, I like how the keyboards are now getting their own space, right? The keyboards are quiet, but I can make them louder. And they're not interrupting anything.
Right.
So that's a bonus by themselves right away. And if I were to make the whole mix bigger, the keyboards are going to get bigger too, and that's going to be a negative thing right away. I don't even have to try it. I know this, right? Now, low end, there's sometimes low end is a problem, or it can be a problem. And now we get to the point where maybe cleaning some tracks up might be a good idea. You know, we can look into some certain things. Again, this is very, very well pre-mixed. It sounds great before I touch it. I did not have to do a lot. There was no tricks that had to be done.
Yeah.
Didn't have to clean anything up. I mean, if we listen to the room sound alone, this is pretty amazing.
This sounds really processed right away. Yeah, that's the...
Fantastic.
I'd not say the downside of working with samples, but just be careful. If you're working with samples, it's usually... you tend to overdo things, especially if you're... not usually dealing with these kind of things, and you are taught on natural or actually played sounds, and then you get these pre-processed things and just do the same thing you would to a natural drum sound, and then you have, for example, way too much compression or too much low end.
Well, I wouldn't call this too much. It sounds actually very, very good. It just gives me very little to do.
If you even add to that,
yes.
If you add the kind of compression you would usually do to room,
it would be too much.
You could show it. What would happen if you?
I could try. I mean, this is enough.
That's enough. But let's just have some fun and
let's just try
what you would usually do.
Okay.
And after that, we'll take a break and take a look at cleaning up and stuff.
Let's see. I love the API 2500 compressor in rooms. I use it a lot for recordings. Actually, would you like to come with me? No. Everything's black and I can't see what's going on. There we go. Love this compressor. I usually start here in medium on new or old. I love the snap. It just makes it just great.
Yeah.
We've got this, how does that work? I gotta hold a button, I think. Was it control? No. Somehow there's a way to make these both light up. Ah, that's how. That's the left and right link. 70 to 80% seems to work well, I think. Yeah, it's not making a big difference just because it's compressed to death anyway.
Yeah.
So even if I were to go really nuts, it's just going to make it quieter. And all that's going to happen is the cymbals are going to come in loud when it sustains. That's it. So, but because there's so much compressing already. So here now.
Sound pretty washy and
Yeah.
they get really
And
loud.
so now the cymbals will return very loud.
Yeah.
Coming back. So it's not really necessary here. You know, I would just go, sounds great, cool, don't need it. Let's see what it sounds like in the mix. Louder. A lot of going on right now. Yeah, it's completely unnecessary. Sounds
Yeah.
interesting, but it's completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Too much of a good thing, you know? It's just like, it sounds like, yeah, cool, but I know if I put a vocal on, I'd be fighting to find a way to get it to cut through all
Yeah, I
this
know what you mean.
monster power. Sometimes it's too powerful. It's just not a good thing. Okay.
So yeah, we'd say we just leave it here and take a short break. Then we'll read through your comments and yeah, see you soon.
Take care.
In
Bye-bye.
5 minutes or something.
In 5 minutes.
Yeah, welcome back to the second part of our mixing modern metal low-end workshop. We have some questions in the chat. We're very sorry that we couldn't answer them in the first half. So let's take a look at the chat. We had some questions about, for example, Hugh Waldog asked if he could buy these plugins for Logic. Actually, yes, because we are actually using a Mac just with Cubase, so these plugins are all available for the Mac OS.
Except, of course, the Cubase versions, which are part of Cubase, but Logic has very, very similar included as well. So
yeah, of course.
Yes.
So yeah, most DAWs come with pretty good stock plugins.
Yes.
So yeah, could work with that. Any other questions? Somebody asked what band this is. That is actually my band called Slaughterra. The song is called Sturm, German word for storm. So feel free to check it out. Actually with vocals, available everywhere. But enough of the shameless advertisement. So, do we have anything else? Doesn't seem like it. So yeah, let's just continue. Where did we stop?
We basically got the things that carry the most bottom end in a mix: drums, bass, guitar. I mean, those are the things that are driving everything forward, and those are the main instruments that you need to focus on to keep the low end going. Specifically, bass, guitar, and kick. And that's what we've worked on. I'm very satisfied with what we got. I'll say it again. The signals you've delivered were already excellent to begin with. So I didn't have to do anything crazy. I'm just sort of exaggerating everything because it's all I can do when the material is this good.
Okay, we have a new question from Richard.
Sure.
He asks, how much influence do kick drum mics have on the frequency response?
Very, very big. But then, everything does. The kick drum itself, the tuning of the kick drum. There is so much you can watch out for. I mean, you can use an SM57 on a kick drum. It'll sound fine. It'll sound very fine, actually. If you look at the schematics of any microphone, you'll see most of them go from 20 hertz to 20,000, and some just have a little bit more emphasis here and there, or less, or a cut, or whatever. There are some microphones specifically designed for lower frequencies. For example, the Beta 52, the Shure is a classic. It's got a very extended low end, and it has a cut around 300 hertz, which makes it, pretty much pre-EQ'd, ready for bass drum, right? There is the, I think it's the I66 or D6
Audix
from
D6,
Audix.
yeah.
That is also very, very similar in that respect, even more extreme. I think it's resonating around 100 hertz and has a very big cut in the low mids and a very, very high boost around 5 or 6K, which is nice. Some classic things are the MD 441 from Sennheiser. That's a microphone that you're going to want to EQ to get to the point you want to get, but it works great on kick drum. The D12, the D112 are also AKG, also very, very good mics for bass drums. But having said that, try an SM58. Sounds great on bass drum. Sounds really, really good. You might have to do a little different EQ, but from the sound, capturing the tonality of the instrument, the SM58 is one of the most underrated microphones in the world. I would use it on snare. I would use it on toms. I would use it on bass drums. It works just fine.
Okay.
It's just they're a bit more flat. They're not as emphasized, but they will work great. But yes, to answer the question, yes, it does have a effect on it, but there's no rules.
Yeah, okay. Having said that, I guess we already had that conversation in private. But what are your opinions on PCM mics in a bass drum?
Hate them.
Okay, why?
Because a PCM mic is a pressure zone microphone. They were usually or actually invented for, conference room recordings. These were microphones they made to put on tables so that everybody could sit around them and talk without any interruption, without having a microphone in your face. They are completely dominant on one side of a capsule, meaning they have they capture nothing from the backside, which means they have much less phase problems. And at some point, somebody started throwing them in bass drums saying, hey, this is cool because they click a lot. And that's true, they click a lot. And then you see people putting microphones on the outside and then the inside, and the combination is great. It is if you corrugate the phases together, because there's a little bit of a discrepancy between the distances, and they're never going to be 100%. Yeah, but they work great live. Yeah, because you have like 10 Ks of power behind you making it sound great. And this is the true reality to it. I personally do not like them in recordings. I find no advantage to them, but I know everybody does it because they see everybody do it live, and it's become a standard that I don't like. So, yeah.
Okay. So
that.
I hope that that is a satisfying answer, Richard. Feel free to ask if you have any other questions regarding mics and stuff you'd actually do if you have real drums instead of pre-processed samples.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, let's continue with the session.
Okay, so we've covered all the main things. At this point, I would probably start looking at things that I could clean up, to reduce rumble in the bottom. If we save the drums, let's see, these are, again, great drums. Sound really good. If I wanted to focus on anything specifically, let's say the overheads. How can I clean these up a bit more? Yeah, well, if I listen to this way, it's a little bit stuffy in the low mids, but not much. Very, very little. I could use the EQ on the channel strip itself. Come in here and, you can see around 200 hertz. There's something there. But the other side, I got to be careful there because there's a lot of the snare body that I like from the overhead. So I might take down a tiny bit around here when I'm at 174 and maybe shelve ever so lightly at 100 hertz just to have a little bit more thin, I guess I'd say. And probably not more than that. Again, we have rooms as well that are completely processed. And there's nothing I want to touch there. Here's a trick that some people do. However, let's take a de-esser. DS. Let's see, what have I got here? Only about 1 million different ones. So de-esser is spelled with 2 E's. What is this one? That's the Renaissance. I think it's from Waves. Yes, no, that's just a de-esser, normal, right? Rooms. When you're using it, rooms loud, and you have a lot of cymbal and you got a lot of wash, you could actually look for that wash. And that's going to be like over 7K usually. These are not loud, the cymbals in this room. But you can reduce the cymbal hits a little bit by using a de-esser. I'm just showing, because why not? But again, here, it's not really a big issue. The cymbals are not too loud here. It's actually very, very good.
So what would you do if you had in most cases you have more than one room signal? You probably have some, I know that you in particular, when we recorded here, you had some A-B configuration far up in the room, and then you had a mid-side configuration. What would you do if you had too much low end, if you have some fast bass drum tracks and you want to clean up the room because it gets really muddy?
Okay.
What would you do?
Because rooms, you're collecting a lot of noise, lots of reflection and lots of noise, from deep, deep lows to way up high. I use shelve EQs instead of high-low pass, because high-low pass always seems to be so drastic, right? As where shelves are just actually taking the floor of this area up and down. I prefer using shelves. I prefer using shelves on a narrow bandwidth so that it's only specifically taking down that area in volume instead of removing completely. And shelving, it seems to work better on rooms than actually high-low pass filtering. That's my main concept on rooms. And then also saturation, compression, stuff like that, which I hear here. The rooms have been saturated, compressed, and everything you can imagine is involved. And also the cymbals are not too loud, which is great. Yeah, but it can quickly get very boomy in room microphones, and it can mess or help up the bass drum, depending on what we have. As again, we do not have that problem here. The bass
Not
drums
really.
are lightly there, no big deal. The snare is beautifully enhanced. There's apparently some kind of reverb on it too. And great, nothing to be done there. I really don't know what I would do. The toms are also cleaned and gated. There's nothing to worry about there as well. And we don't have any other tracks to deal with. There's no hi-hats or extra things. It's all in the overhead, so everything's there. And as we said, we cleaned up just a tiny bit. Very, very little. I wouldn't do more. It's absolutely maximum. But let's go to things like the lead guitar here. We've got a lead guitar here, right? There's quite a few things we could do here. I'll take an EQ, SSL EQ in this case, just to show something different. It's a little thick around 200 hertz, so you hear this that we can easily get rid of without affecting the overall sound, and just to keep the mix a little bit clearer. So you can hear, it just clears it up a bit. I could maybe high pass a little bit. I wouldn't do too much because here's the standalone part. The guitar should still sound thick. And you hear there's a bit woofy and muddy sounding. There I can clean it up a little bit. So, having said that, I recently discovered this neat plugin from SSL called Guitar Strip. First, I thought it was very weird. It has a lot of things that you might or might not need. Let's start here on the left side with a high pass filter. It's very simple to just, drag and drop and set up as you would need. It's got this phase correction. I guess it's based on when you have a stereo signal or two guitars and it's somehow corrugating the phase from one side to the other. I haven't had a chance to use it yet, so I'm going to leave it off, of course. It's got a compressor that I won't need for this thing, but what's really neat is it's got this guitar amp simulation that I'm just loving very much. And I'm going to show you what it does here. Let's turn off everything. Let's solo it a bit. Here's our sound. Now I've got this guitar amp thing. We've only got two choices, a guitar amp and a bass amp. You can drive it and add to your preamp, I guess reduction as well, but only 6 dB, and add is 30 dB. So turn it on. Oh, I got to turn the whole plug-in on. Okay. Yes, it's completely changed the sound of what we got going on.
Thicker and a bit less.
You've got all these controls here, like now low end. It's called boost. I don't know why it's called boost, because to me it's clearly a resonance. But if I pull it out, it's definitely too much. But taking it out a bit makes it a little bit cleaner. Very nice. The edge is scratch. Let's call it scratch because that's what it is. Punch seems to be mids. That's what it seems to be. Anyway, I'm going to leave that like it is. I'm going to show in the mix what it's doing. It's just changed the character of the guitar completely. Completely. But it cuts through nicer.
Yeah, it's a bit more mid-focus and less hissy. We have another question in the chat. It's how do you get a really nice dry sound? My mixes just seem to have much space. They don't sound thin enough right now. I don't know. Could you specify that? Because
thin enough.
Because I guess thin and roomy or dry are two
very different things.
Yeah, because I don't know. I mean, if you're using reverb or delay, you could also just really easy overdo it because I guess this is not very dry sounding because we have a lot of effects.
A lot of effects, yes.
On the lead guitar as well as we heard the rooms in solo. They add a lot to the drum sound.
Yes.
Not particularly in the low end, not necessarily. It just gives the snare its actual
the dimension.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, two things there. I mean, I'm going to try to help based on what I understand. You're saying that it sounds not thin enough. That means to me it sounds too thick, I guess, somewhere. I'm guessing. I don't know if he's written a reply there. But if it's too thick, well, it's basically what we're showing here. You need to figure out what needs to be thick and what does not, because thinning out certain tracks that are just unnecessarily thick is the easiest way to getting clarity, right? You want to clean it up, get rid of the junk you don't need. Don't try to emphasize there what you do need, but think the other way around. Remove what you don't need, right? And then when it comes to space or reverb or dry, whatever you want to call it, you have to decide my music that I'm listening to, where should it sound like it's coming from? Should I be in an arena right now? Should I be in a small wooden room? Should I be in the living room? Where's it coming from? Is it coming from the stage? This that we're doing right now, we're trying to, I picture, a really nice stage sound in a live situation, and it should sound like there's a band in front of me giving me a nice performance from a stage. So I'm basing the rooms and the dimension, or let's say the area that is coming from a stage. That's what I'm basing it on, right? So we got this reverb going on. You've got some echoes in the guitar. Sounds to me like there's a real cool stage performance going on. There are no rules, but I probably would not use a 0.03 second reverb on the guitar because it would be absolutely pointless, and all it would do would just be add dirt and noise, If I added any reverb at all, it would probably be a bigger room, but here we have nothing on the rhythm guitars because it's just not necessary. All the room, all this feeling of bigness is being taken care of by the drums. They're taking care of all that, basically, that feeling, right? And then we have this guitar here, which has some reverb, some echoes going on, and that's taking care of adding that dimension as well, especially when it stops and it's all by itself. If that were totally dry, which we can't show right now, it would be a completely different effect. It would sound like a dead stop, and it would feel like being in your living room, Yeah,
so. The same goes for the keys, I guess. I'd say most of the keys in music like this is just some backing ambience
adding
stuff,
space.
Just to fill some holes or just
as a reverb would.
Yeah, not necessarily to be clearly audible. Like the strings here, we have in the released version, they are quite far in the background, and we have the keys playing the melody in the chorus. These are actually meant to be a lead instrument, but yet again, we have the strings, which are meant as I'd say, just used like a pad. These are usually these long sustained sounds you would use just to add some ambience.
Yes.
And depth and
ambience, right?
Just make it bigger. Not necessarily as an audible element, just you can feel it, not necessarily hear it.
Just filling the gaps. Yes. Okay, well, since we're there, let's continue with this lead guitar because we're talking about cleaning up tracks. And show this amp simulation here. I played around with the EQ as well a little bit, and I found that adding a little bit of high end looks pretty dramatic there. But this EQ is working very different than a normal EQ, I guess. So adding quite a bit of high end seems to help this a lot. So let's listen to this. That's what we had. Yeah, it's cool. And the bottom is a little bit cleaned up because, we've taken out a little bit here, we've cut off a little bit here. Exactly. And it's cleaned it up a bit and keeping room available so that all the things that are carrying the low frequencies, the kick and the bass, are passing through easily without any obstruction. There's nothing in the way, right? And if you get everything sounding too thick, as somebody was saying here, it's really hard to get this pulse and this pressure come through the mix when it's being covered up by other unneeded noises and sounds. So, having said that, we've also got a clean guitar here, a whole section where there's a breakdown. Really cool, ultra clean guitar sound, right? Some chorus, some echo, and whatever going on there.
It's a shimmer reverb, some flanger, and a delay. So pretty basic stuff.
Well, we've found that this strip here works pretty neat too. In this case, using a little bit of compression, actually no EQ at all, and a little bit of this amp thing again. Gave a little bit more feeling. We've taken out quite a bit of this resonance, which also seemed to clean it up nicely. And here we only have keyboards in this clean. So, yeah. Was there somebody writing something?
Yeah, he pointed out that there's only one bass track, and he would like to know the signal chain. You see, the problem is there.
Explain.
Yeah, I have to. This is actually a program bass. This is a plugin from Submission Audio called the Gin Bass, which is sampled from an
it's an instrument, basically, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a DI track, it's a complete instrument.
Yeah, and you could use it just playing the DI track, but there is an amp sim built in, which sounds pretty good. I'm actually not sure if it's that what I used here. Usually I'd go for Parallax by Neural DSP, which is great for bass because you have full control over the low end, which should usually be rather clean. I mean, you could explain, if you have a normal bass, how would you approach recording it so you could have a clean and yet a pretty gritty bass sound in the mix?
Okay. Let's say we're not using a sim, right? One thing that's great about this year, 2022, is delay compensation.
Yeah.
So, anybody that's ever recorded bass, especially bass players, you stand next to your amp thinking, wow, I've got a great, powerful bass sound. You put a mic in front of it, very close, and you go, wow, I have a very boring sounding bass sound. Because bass frequencies need time and space to actually develop, right? So you pull a mic back, let's say a meter or two from a bass amp, and all of a sudden it sounds alive, and all that power that you were feeling standing next to it is obvious. So the problem is you don't get this hi-fi bottom end, the low frequencies. It doesn't exist. It's just not there. And it will be parts because of the room, a lot because of the room, and because of the mic being far away from the amp and not being able to hold these deep frequencies, which just dissipate in the air. They go away. So the trick is to use your DI signal combined with your amp signal. Sounds easy enough. The issue is phase correlation. You've got your DI signal with a sound that's going to be earlier than your microphone signal. Fortunately, there's great plugins out right now that can actually compensate for this delay. There's stuff like the In-Phase from Waves, which works quite well. And then there's this other one, I can remember the name before I lie, because it's called Auto Align. I just missed it. Let me pull this up, and it's on the wrong thing. What company is this, by the way?
SoundRadix, it is.
SoundRadix, okay. This is a great alignment plugin. I'm not going to get into details how it works, but it does a great job of taking your DI and your mic signal and aligning that the phases match. Because if you don't align that, you're going to have this strange phasey, sounds like there's some filtering going on, a sound that makes it really crap. But just to get to the point, usually you're trying to get a good amp sound that captures the growl, the distortion amount, and the pressure that you want of your amp. And the DI signal is there to collect like the deepest frequencies, the bottom, to give it this hi-fi sound, right? And I would usually, in this case, use the DI almost only for the bottom, not always, but almost usually only for the deep frequencies, compressing them quite a bit so I can simply add it to my amp to make it sound big, right? That's the deep things.
Yeah.
And if you start distorting these frequencies too much, you lose low end. It's just going away, right? So like the Parallax is doing something like this. It's got an amp and it's adding this the deepest direct signals, compressed or not, to it, which saves you the time of trying to have to use two different setups and a in-phase plugin or auto-line plugin to match your phases in just one plugin. It makes life very, very easy. So it's actually a very, very cool plugin. However, if it's not the amp sound you want, it's not going to be for you. Then you have to do it the old school way, where you align your phases somehow until it works. In the past, on a tape machine, we would do this with actually using delays. Digital delays were great at the time when you could reduce to milliseconds, because we're talking frames here. We're not talking milliseconds. We're talking frames that make the difference, right? And it can be 10 frames, and the difference is so extreme. It's so extreme. It's hard to believe, but it really is that way. So going back to recording your amp far away, now it's so easy to just match things up. Not like for 30 years ago, it was a big problem to make that work, or you just didn't use your DI, which a lot of people are doing these days. They just don't use it. But the fact is, your DI is there to take your deep frequencies, and your amp is there for the low mids and the highs and whatever above, and you add these together to create your big sound. Right?
Yes, we have a follow-up question to that, and that's if Richard asked if he was doing it in the box with the duplicate DI track, should he high pass the track which is distorted?
You can. This is where it gets all crazy. Any EQ you do after the fact will have some effect on the phase correlation.
Yeah.
You can use they're called phase linear EQs that work a little bit easier. They take care of this for you. However, I don't like the way they sound. I'm not a fan at all. I don't want to get into that because I just don't like them. I've tried many times and just never was satisfied with the sound these things actually made, even though in the world of physics, they're doing their job really, really well. You do not have to. If there is too much bottom end from your amp sound, well, then yes, you might cut it away. And I'll say specifically, be careful about high pass filtering, because that seems to be what everybody's doing these days. It's always high or low pass filtering. Shell VQ seems to be forgotten. With Shell VQ, you can just simply reduce from, let's say, 100 hertz and below, 10, 5, 2 dB, instead of radically just cutting everything off, which makes phase correlation more difficult at the end of the day. It gets harder and harder when you start completely removing frequencies.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, yes and no. It all depends on what you've got. It depends on the signal. I would probably not high or low pass. I would just reduce it with the Shell EQ, whatever's bothering me, if it's bothering me at all. Because if I have an amp sound and I like the way the amp sounds, I just want to add a little bit of deep lows, I'll probably leave it alone and just add a little bit of deep lows from my DI signal. Of course, what can happen is even if it's phase corrugated very well, there might be a note or two that when they match, they start to get really loud or explosive because there's a resonance, usually by the amp.
Yeah.
That's just way over the top, causing it to get loud at that point.
And we actually noticed that in our last workshop, that there was an a distorted track. We're using an amp simulation and the DI track. And I guess we were using in-phase in this case because we had a similar issue which you would have if you use to record an actual amp. So still, you had to check for phase correlation if you're doing it with an amp sim.
Yes, and in this case, I mean, we can get really complicated. In this case, let's say the note A, it's doing this. You could actually add a dynamic EQ, like the HOFA-IQ EQ, that when the A is hit, that it's dramatically reducing this note, so that this never becomes a problem, okay? it's a very difficult thing to deal with. You know, there's so many things that make the difference. The bass amp, the bass guitar, the player. There's really a lot of things that can make the difference of what's happening there. But, you know, usually I would not, and come back to the point, I would not do any hardcore filtering, only shelving, and then really decide which signal is doing what to my overall sound.
Okay. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. But we have another regarding the in-the-box approach, and that's if the guitars are recorded with an amp simulation or with real amps and microphones. I mean, I did a workshop about amp simulations. You can watch it on the channel right here. These are actual tracks I recorded directly into my interface, and then I used STL Tones Amp Hub. I guess it is the simulation of an Framus Drachen and a EVH 5150, so just typical metal amps, I'd say. Impulse responses, I'm not quite sure. It might be some IRs created, or the ones in the plugin itself. But yeah, these are virtual amps. I left out the low cut I set in the plugin, just so you might have to clean something up. But I don't know your opinion on that if we listen to the tracks here.
Nothing to clean up for me.
Okay.
That's all good. All fine to me.
But would you go with a low pass in the case of guitars? Or is this also a case just using shelves?
It depends what I hear. And like here, I mean, if we look what we've done here, we've done no EQing at all, right? We have decided to use this Master X multiband compressor, which is actually stressing the low end. In other words, it's pushing into the compressor. The low end is pushing in the compressor more. We are doing absolutely no filtering and no EQ everywhere, and I am completely satisfied. I would not cut a thing because we've made our kick drum and our bass guitar big. Now here's the thing, if you've got a small kick drum and a small bass guitar and you turn your guitars, which are fat, on, the first thing you'll think is, oh, my guitar's too fat. So what happened? You start cutting frequencies away. And all it does is it matches to the kick drum and the bass better. Absolutely. But therefore you just have a smaller mix, right?
Okay.
So you need to find on your system, on your speakers or your normal listening situation, what is my limit? Where does the bass sound good? When am I overdoing it? When am I doing too little? Because if we turn off all the plugins and compared the mix, it sounds fine in itself. It works very well, but we compared it to a big Hollywood production, it'll go, ooh, it sounds tiny. Right? Yeah. Then you have to figure out why, right? And then again, there's 100 ways to do this. You want to worry about your master bus. You want to worry about your individual bus groups, your individual instruments. In this case, we worked on individual instruments, the kicks and the bass guitar, matching those up, and then automatically the guitar just fell into place, right? Without touching a thing. So there's so many different ways to do this. There's so many different situations where it can work. I will say from what I hear here, we're definitely overdoing it with the bass and the kick. But it's kind of the point of the topic, so there's nothing wrong with that. But back to your question, the guitars sound great. I don't need to EQ a thing. I hear nothing I would change. So job well done. And I'm glad you didn't high pass filter those things. That would have been too much. It would have. Yeah. I would have had to add low end to make it work. Then we're doing this everywhere, you know. So, be careful what you turn.
Do you think that's a problem, or a common issue if you get any tracks that there's too much high pass filter?
Absolutely. I often get tracks where it's people are watching maybe too many YouTube tutorials where I've seen it myself, where the first thing that comes up is you should cut everything below 100 hertz off your guitar. And I'm thinking that's such an abstract answer, because what if it was done at one point somewhere in the chain anyway, and you're doing it again, you're just thinning and pretty soon you're going to have nothing left, If you don't hear it, leave it alone. And especially if you're going to let somebody else mix it, leave it alone and let him decide, There's nothing wrong with that.
Alrighty. Let's head back to our session. Do we have anything left to say about the session, or any suggestions what we could do to it?
Sure.
If we overdo it, or
Overdoing is always a good thing.
Just for the sake of showing it, but
okay.
Yeah.
Let's try something. Let's go to the sum of things, right? So now we've got a kind of a sound going, our mix, so to say. Let's go to the sum. Let's see what we can do here. And remember we were working with that Sheps plugin, the omni-channel? Let's see what that thing does, the stump, on the whole sum of things. Here won't matter. Oh, there it matters. Bit much, huh?
That's a bit too much, yeah.
Better, isn't it?
Way better, actually.
Okay. Well, that shows that what we've done is pretty much a good thing. So other things we can do are also like with the Pultec. The A1, come over here. And also classic things. Something like this. Guitar just goes away.
That's not long.
And this is something that's being done often in mastering studios. It's like the mid-cut effect that some people seem to love, the smiley face EQ or wherever you want to call it. This is doing that by removing highs and lows. It's pretty weird when you think about it. No mids are being touched. No mids were harmed in this process. but they just go away. They just go away for some reason. What I'm happy to say about this, what we've done right now, is by not touching the master, we've got a very round mix going with absolutely no influence in the master bus. Now, that's another discussion that comes up a lot. How do you treat your master bus? And there are great plugins or devices that you might want to insert because it makes something. And if you know the instrument or the device well enough, use it to influence your sound as you mix. No question about it. If you don't, if you're a newcomer, don't do that. I don't care what anybody says. Don't do that. Because if you're not sure what's going on, and just because it's got pretty lights and somebody said it's a great plugin, you should definitely start with that. It's not true. If you don't know what you're doing, then no. I think it's Andrew Sheps that his classic way of starting a mix, I'm trying to remember this by memory, is to set up the EQ like this, similar as we just did, right? And he works at 100 hertz, and he's doing about like something like this. I'm guessing, okay? Something like this, and then he has that in first, and then he mixes around that. Now look what happens if we turn this on. I have to fix this then. Much better.
Oh, yeah. We're not building a mix around that.
Exactly. I'm not saying that's a bad way to do it. That might work great, but you really have to know what's happening before you do that, you know. I have for fun tried that. It's not for me. However, doing it a bit more subtle, doing it in the lower frequencies, I have found to be interesting. I find that the Pultec, it does create a really cool vibe, but I have to be careful about how far you go, because you notice on the mid, it's the mid killer. And in guitar music, mids are very, very important. So it's just not for me, you know, and don't believe the hype. You have to try things out for yourself and see how it works. If you want to use something I am a fan of, is this, if you can find it, the vintage drive, which we had on the drums. I like the way it's working on the master. I'll trim the output a little bit. Oh, is that actually, it's actually real close. Now this is a plugin I might use in my mix and mix into it because I really like what it's doing. And when I hear it on, I'm saying, well, maybe I could turn this up or this down right away because it's influencing my levels as well, obviously. So sometimes using stuff like this or tape simulations, I don't know, plugins that just make mojo, it's not a bad idea to try using it from the very, very beginning because it does create something. It's also more fun to mix because right away, I mean, come on, it just makes it more fun to hear. Let's find another space. Cool. Never too much. Okay, it's a good one.
What we were doing earlier is we were playing around with the snare a bit.
All right.
So we could also show you that.
Oh yes,
add some thump to the snare.
Okay. Well, let's do that now. Let's first turn this one on. Which one was this? I'm not sure which one this was.
We did two things. So one was an experiment with an amp sim, and the other one
right.
something completely different.
Okay, yes, you're right. I'm trying to remember. Okay, we copied the snare, and well, basically this is a snare, and then we've added a mic preamp. In this case, it's a Slate Neve, the FG73. It's a clone of the 1073, and we just turned up the virtual drive all the way to make it kind of like distort. It doesn't distort that much, but it totally removes the transients, and this boxy sound, boop boop boop, is gone. So when we add this to the snare, the real snare, the other snare, it makes it nice and thick. It's a cool effect.
Definitely.
Okay, and another thing that was great from Steffen here, he discovered this, I guess by chance.
By pure accident, actually.
we were checking out a plugin, and he just decided to put it on the snare because we wanted to see if it was working or not. Well, not necessarily on the snare, but if the plugin itself was working. So he put an amp sim, if it open up here, on the snare, and it sounds like this. That's great. Isn't that just great? And I was like, that's not so awful, to be honest. So we tried it.
Too much
to show it. But it's oddly pleasing. It's funny. I mean, I have always distorted snares. I told you for years I've been doing this with multiple microphones or cloning the track and sending it through a device that distorts. I love doing that. You did this by chance, and it turns out to be hilariously cool.
Absolutely. It just adds sustained, it adds some ring to it. It's just funny what you can do. Happy little accidents, I'd say.
I guess we're counting down to the end of this.
Yeah, we start a bit later, so let's just overdo it a bit. So if you have any questions left in the chat, feel free to ask, unless we're going to leave it right here.
Let's see if anyone has any questions. But yeah, that was a really, really cool, funny thing. I don't even know what amp this is. Is that supposed to be a Dietzel?
A Dietzel VH4, I guess?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. But that's just hilarious. I mean, it sounds god-awful. I mean, it's hilarious how bad it sounds. But in the mix and added to it...
You can work with it, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you can tweak this to make it sound even cooler. Or maybe there's another amp or whatever. But the point is, cool trick. Cool trick. Why not? Why not? So, has anybody got any questions? Anything to be asked or answered? Wait another minute or so.
Yeah. Could
And
play
if
the
not-
track so we don't have to wait in silence.
Well, we could do that. How about we start right about here at this breakdown?
I'll leave it right here. We have a question. The question is if distortion adds more overtones, and this is why it sounds better.
Yeah, of course. That's why. That's the whole discussion about digital versus analog since the last 30-something years. Yeah, everything analog and everything that distorts, even the slightest bit, adds some kind of overtones that, if you want to call it better, it's like this. Distortion is only bad when you don't like it. And that's it.
Okay.
Because if you play guitar, is a good distortion? I mean, in the world of audio, distortion is actually considered bad, period. So how can it be good for an amp? Well, because you like it. That's why it's good, right?
Yeah,
So
basically.
yes, it's good if you like it.
Okay, so next question is how important is referencing to you?
Depends. I mean, it depends. If I'm working out of house or in another studio, then it's very important just to keep my ears, in clear to what I'm doing, because I'm usually working at my studio all the time. I often like to, when I refer, I do it much, much later in the mix because I just want to see where it goes. Because what's not happening a lot these days is people are not trying to be unique. They're mixing their albums, they're comparing it to everything, they're making their kick sound like the kick of their favorite record, the snare like the snare of their favorite record, and sometimes just doing what you feel just by making mistakes, you can come up with some pretty interesting stuff. Oops, I accidentally put a Marshall on my snare. Wow, that's cool. And if you start referring too much, you might compare, and it's like, is it better or worse? Or is it just different? So it depends. It really depends. I try to stay away from it unless I'm unsure. If I start getting very unsure, I'm in a different environment, I will compare or reference a little bit more. But if I am sure, I reference much less.
Okay. So, but I guess that's also you speaking from years and years of experience.
Of course,
I guess.
absolutely. Yeah. So if you're new at this, yeah, of course, you got to start somewhere, so refer. Check it, compare it, criticize yourself, try to do what the other guy's doing, and it's then it can be a very, very important thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. So one last question is: do you ever feel the need to use sidechain compression on the bass triggered by the kick drum in metal, like it's done in EDM or something?
No, absolutely not. It's not an issue. I mean, I could see it maybe being interesting for some kind of genres. Or let's say you have a song, I don't know, let's say something like Rammstein, where you actually want the bass guitar, the frequency to push away when the kick drum comes. That's what's happening in EDM. It's pushing down like the whole sum,
Yep.
if you want. So the bass drum sounds loud as hell when it comes out. I don't like that effect, period. I don't like to hear compression. So for me, it's completely unnecessary. And if we had, for example, a frequency that's getting away with the bass drum, I would probably just use a dynamic EQ to fix that frequency that's bothering me at that point. So no, I wouldn't.
All right. So I guess that's the end for today. We hope you liked it and hope you learned something today. And yeah, hope to see you soon. Take care.
Take care.